All right, for the player pages, we start off with their fantasy summary, basically showing their historical performance in terms of expected fantasy points per game, maybe their strength of schedule, that would be opponent plus minus, how much they overperformed their expected fantasy points, and then team shares across like the overall game and then also within the red zone. We can also see graphical views over time if you're interested in something like that. And as always, we have these glossaries here where you can type in something and say, oh, well, what does XFP mean? And it'll let you know. We then have splits by receiving and running or whatever it might be for the position group. Again, kind of breaking these up. You can look at all the different years, for instance, as a runner and say, how has his profile changed? So in 2025, he actually had the most rushing work out of any season, but he did not perform nearly as well given those opportunities versus other years. He also had a very healthy share of his red zone running work, and again, not as good in the red zone as he has been maybe in the past. The with or without use can look at their performance given who they've been playing with. A good example in 2025 would likely be their quarterback, Brock Purdy. So Purdy was out for some good amount of the year. If we wanted to see what type of effect that might have had, given that Purdy will be the starter again, you can take a look at something like that. So as it turns out, really not a huge difference in how he performed, both opportunity-wise and performance-wise with and without Purdy versus Mac Jones. But in instances where Lamar Jackson is hurt, that might have a much bigger impact on a player's profile. The metrics are kind of where this site, I think, really shines. You can look at how their performance has evolved again. But one thing I can call out here, right, is, for instance, his EPA per rush was far lower than it was at his prime. His success rate was lower. He didn't really have any huge home run touchdown type of runs, and then his rushing yard over expected was actually pitiful. It's a massive drop off from what we're expecting, right? Like looking through all the years in his career, you can see he's like above average or elite most seasons. And this year, not only did he have a very, very low percentage of runs that were kind of positive, but also he did poorly in them. His broken tackle rate was down. This kind of screams to me like a runner who's kind of ready for going off the pastures, but I'll let you make that call. We also have them split up by different descriptive positions like shotgun runs under center, directionals, which gap they were hitting, runs where kind of the other team was expecting a run. Those are considered like more important in some instances, and then also their goal line. We can also see their EPA profile in each of these situations. So like, how good were they in those spots? Green being great, gray neutral, red poor. And not too much to say that hasn't been already said regarding Christian McCaffrey, but you can definitely tell that like his goal line share was rather healthy this year, like top 4% for running backs across the league. Receiving, similar type of idea. We can look at how things have evolved. You can also filter to catchable throws only to kind of level set the year-over-year playing field, right? Like it's not his fault that the throw wasn't catchable, right? McCaffrey this year, even though his running was really poor, was just fine as a receiver. Did well with the targets that he got. His share was the highest he's seen as a 49er. They really relied on him last year to move the chains. And then you can also see things like, drop percentage with not ideal this year, but not a huge deal given that it's still relatively average. You can also then see his percent for the team. So, highest possible percentile for a running back here, 23% of team targets going to him is insane. And then you can see it broken up by, man versus zone or whatever else, and also the EPA he had in these situations. He did quite well as a runner, as a catcher last year, whether it was screens or man or zone or whatever else. But, if you see a big drop off in one of these as well, you start getting pretty concerned about his fantasy outlook. Team targets would show you the percent of the team targets that went to McCaffrey in these situations. And then it compares it versus the top 30 fantasy players at his position. You can also compare versus his last 2 years to see where things may have changed. So for instance, like he got maybe a few more throws further down the field than he did in the past. You can also look at his completion percentage over expected in these situations, given that he is compared against running backs again for qualified zones. So you need at least 10 targets. If not, it's pretty noisy, or 5 targets. And all of that again is in the glossaries. We then have the route tree to show you what type of routes he ran. He ran an insane number of out routes last year and did quite well in them. His EPA percentile was 86% versus 40 on these in the past year. So he really relied on these out routes. He got more hitch and curl routes. Everything else is kind of similar to what it was in the past, but you can also filter to catchable ones as well if you're interested, where he looks a little bit less stellar. But in the case of a running back, right, like all you really care about is that he's getting a lot of targets and a lot of catchable ones, and I think that will hold up for him. You can then look at his snap share by different situations. This is just for 2025, but this guy was as big of a bell cow as you could possibly get. You can also see like when they were blown out, or if it's a late down, was it short, long, medium? This guy was on the field on every single third down for the 49ers practically. The injury history, pretty extensive for Christian McCaffrey, but somehow last year he was spared, only like 2 questionable tags. But you can also see like, hey, he's had a lot of wear and tear on this calf over the past couple years. Again, not a great sign, and we know he's very injury prone, so maybe something you'd want to look out for. Lastly, you have his contract. So we can see in 2026 he's virtually uncuttable. $21 million is in the red that they can't recoup. But this would be his last year where they're really on the hook, where the 49ers can get rid of him next year without a huge cap hit. And then lastly, we have the game logs. You can see how he performed every week, both opportunity and performance-wise, target shares, snap shares, and then also how difficult of an opponent he had in that week. We can also look at like a chart view over time, or if you want to look at a specific season. And as far as I know, there's no publicly free site that does this. So I think this graph in and of itself is a value add. Interesting thing for him is that he's almost always performed his fantasy points over his expected fantasy points over the course of his career, comparing that orange to blue line. But this year it was a little more rocky. Again, super high level. Every single player has a profile like this. There's also the team pages that compare players within their own roster. And then we have tools, which I'll get into in another video, that can kind of show you how they look versus the rest. So a little sneak peek, like compared to the rest of the field, McCaffrey had pretty good run blocking, but his rushing yards over expected was pretty brutal. So yeah, that's all for today.